Hello everybody. We're going to talk today about some of the basic components of makeup orientation and mobility. As part of that, we're going to be talking about definitions, certain terms, how they relate to teaching children and to some extent adults how to travel independently in their home, in the community, in the school, wherever they may be. At the very end of this presentation, we'll also talk about the various skills that you'll be learning as you go through experiences under the blindfold. So let's begin with some definitions. And probably the most basic definition that we should go over is orientation. And orientation is using the senses to determine where you are and your relationship to the significant objects that are around you. Now, what are the significant objects that are around you? Those, generally speaking, are permanent, easily found objects, immovable objects, those that are always easily found and always in place. Let me give you an example. I had a lesson with a low vision child, and we were walking around, and I asked the child to pick out some landmarks that the child could use to identify when we got back to that same spot. And what the child did was picked out a red car. Okay. We continued on with our walk. We turned around, we came back. I asked the child to find that same starting spot. Red car was gone. So it wasn't permanent, it wasn't immovable. It wasn't an object that he could really count on. Well, in general, how do we organize space? There are a number of ways that we can organize space. And one is from our own standpoint, our own viewpoint. You know, we might ask questions such as, what's to my left? What's to my right? What's ahead of me? What's behind me? What's farther ahead of me? What's farther behind me? If I'm outside, I might be thinking, what's the parallel street alongside of me that I'm walking on? What's the one that's right alongside of me? What's the one that's a little farther away, a block away, but still alongside of me? To a great extent, we develop a cognitive map, a mental image of the environment that's around us. Now, if we do that by what's physically immediately around us, it's called an egocentric approach. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later in another slide that's coming up. But let me take a laser pointer. Let's take a look at this. If this is a room, and in this room we have a door, we have a desk, and we have windows. And the individual is standing where the X is and facing towards the wall where the door is located. We can describe the environment based upon our relationship. We can say the desk is behind us and a little to the left. We could say the door is in front of us and much farther to the left. We could say the windows are to the right of us. And that's an egocentric point of view because it's based upon our own viewpoint, our standing point, where we are, and everything is in relation to us. What would happen, however, if the individual walks into a room, or even beyond that, if the individual wants to think about the room and the person is not in the room? It's no longer the relationship of the individual to objects in the room. Now the individual has to have an understanding of the relationship of the objects to each other in the room. The fact that in this room, the desk is across from the windows, the door is in the corner of the room, and it's not necessarily in relation to where the person's standing, but it's in relation to the room itself and where things are opposed to each other within the room. Okay, let's go on and let's talk about the actual definition of mobility. So mobility is the act of traveling through the environment in a safe, efficient, graceful, and independent way. That's the goal. It's not always totally reached. It's not always completely efficient or graceful. We hope that it's always safe. And it may be independent more or less depending upon the skills of the individual. But by safe, we mean such things as not tripping over obstacles, finding the edge of the drop-off when you're approaching stairs so you don't fall, not falling off of curbs, making crossings of streets when it's safe to cross, when it's clear. That's really important. Now, by using the term efficient, we really mean not taking extra steps that you don't need to take, going places that you don't need to go. So for example, if somebody's walking down the sidewalk and they get confused and they end up walking up a driveway, it takes them out of their way, they have to recover, they have to get back to the sidewalk. That's not an efficient way to travel. Or if somebody's traveling along and there are parking lots that they're passing and they wander into the parking lot and then they have to determine where they are and come back out, that's not efficient travel. So we want to make the travel as efficient as possible. And what about the term graceful? When we talk about traveling in a graceful way, we're talking about somebody who has a rhythm to the way they're walking. They have good posture and gait. They're not bumping into everything. They're not tripping. Their cane probably isn't sticking into everything as they walk. And so there's a certain fluidity to their movement. And then finally, we do talk about traveling independently. Now, does that mean that we never ask for help? No, not at all. There are times when the best travelers have to ask for help. But it means having enough confidence to know when you don't need help and recognizing when you do need help, and in those situations, asking for help. One of the texts that we often refer to is one by Hill and Ponder, Orientation and Mobility Techniques. And in that text, Hill and Ponder recommend that we ask ourselves as travelers, or that we make sure that the students we're teaching are asking themselves 3 questions whenever they're traveling. The first question is, where am I? And that means, in relation to what? Where am I in relation to the parallel street I'm walking along? How far away from the perpendicular street that I'm approaching? And how do I identify which side of the street I'm on? Can I use geographical directions? Am I on the east side? Am I on the west side? Am I approaching the southeast corner or the southwest corner? And so what do we use to determine that? There's something called topographical information, which is based upon objects in the environment. In other words, I'm near the church. I'm across the street from the church. So we could use geographical directions. We could use topographical directions. We could use street patterns as well. And the big question is, can we put ourselves on the map in relation to those objects? And so we're always asking the question, where am I in relation to those significant objects that are around me? The next question is, where is my objective? How far away is it? How many streets away is it? How many streets do I have to cross? Do I have to make turns? What kind of a route is it? Is it an L-shaped route? Is it, does it have more than one turn? So knowing where the objective is and how to get there is very important. And the third one is really physically, how do I get there? What is the most direct route that I can take? And sometimes the most direct route might not even be the best route to take because it might be a dangerous route. It may have crossings that are difficult. It may have construction. And so the question becomes, can I plan an alternative route? Or if I've gotten to a location using one route, can I return by reversing the route, or can I even take a different route back? So the question is, how do I get there? How do I get back? Along the way, there's certain types of information that a traveler really needs to take into account. And we're going to define some of those. The first and one of the most important has to do with landmarks along the way. Landmark is defined as any familiar object, sound, color, temperature, or tactile clue that's easily recognized, is constant, has a known location or a permanent location in the environment. So in the example that I gave earlier, a car certainly wouldn't be a landmark because it's not permanent. It might have a known location at the time, but that location would change. Now we can go further and we can talk about primary landmarks and secondary landmarks. A primary landmark is something that we can always count on. It's a landmark that's always present in the environment and would be difficult to miss as one travels along a path. An example might be a change in the texture on the ground. There's certain areas in the residential neighborhood where we do our training where we find all of a sudden there's gravel. It's a good landmark, it's always there, we can find it, it tells us where we are. Secondary landmarks, on the other hand, are landmarks that may always be present in the environment, but may not be necessarily always found. An example might be an expansion joint that we might find in a hallway that joins two intersecting hallways or parts of a hallway. And when we hit it, we know exactly where we are. But sometimes we might walk over it and not feel it under our feet. And so it's not a primary, it's a secondary. Sometimes a secondary landmark may also be called an information point. But there also are elements in the environment that we'll call cues or clues. And those are features that are not unique, but they can be used in conjunction with other features. And together they tell us exactly where we are, tell us our location. For example, in the Mashau building, in the education building, if you were walking along and you got to an area that was crowded, had lots of people talking, and you thought you were heading towards the lobby, that would tell you, I'm in the lobby, because a lot of people congregate in the lobby. But sometimes people don't congregate in the lobby. And so it could be a cue or a clue, but it's something you can't always count on. And it may sometimes never be there, or not the time that you are in that location. All right, let's talk a little bit about orientation strategies. How do we orient ourselves to the larger environment, whether that environment is inside or whether that environment is outside? Well, one excellent way is by the use of compass directions. Now, not all children can use them, and at an early age they may have great difficulty, and they may have to rely more on right and left and forward and behind. But at a certain stage, compass directions become a much better way of organizing the environment. And basically they're directions that are indicated by the magnetic fields of the Earth, and of course they consist of 4 main cardinal points: north, south, east, and west, and they're separated with 90-degree intervals around a circle of the compass. And by using those directions, one can determine location in the environment independent of where the individual is, not necessarily only from an egocentric standpoint, but from a broader perspective of the environment. Another thing to consider is numbering systems. What's the patterning or the arrangement of numbers? It could be indoors in rooms, it could be outdoors referring to addresses. Think about this building, for example. Our class is typically in room 1103. It's on the main floor. The 1000 designation indicating first floor. We know that the room next door is 1105. If we go in the opposite direction, the numbers then should be getting smaller. The distance between 1103 and 1105 is 2 numbers. Is that consistent all the way down the hall? Do we drop by 2 numbers each time we come to a doorway? So how many numbers are there in between rooms? Do we find that the odd numbers are always on the same side and the even numbers on the other side? And how far do the numbers go in this particular hallway? So these are all things that we'll explore, and once we know those things, it really helps us to maintain our orientation. A little bit more about numbering systems. Oftentimes when somebody walks into a building, if there's a major focal point in the building, that's where the numbering systems might start. It may be a central point. It may start with 1 and go up, 2, 3, 4, 5. It could start at 100 or at 1,000 and go up by a certain number. Or there could be reference line systems. Some hallways could be 100 or 1,000 hallways. Some could be 2,000 hallways. Another hallway might be a 3,000 hallway. So getting to know where the numbers originate from and how they work can be very helpful. Outside, in a similar fashion, oftentimes we have streets and we have avenues. I think about New York oftentimes. I think about Manhattan. And I think about the east-west streets are numbered streets. So all the way north, we're 130, way up there. All the way down by Battery Park, we're in the very low numbers. Then the north-south streets are really called avenues, and they have names. So what's the system in any area that a person might be traveling in? Oftentimes in a city, the numbers emanate from a central part of the city. In Cleveland, for example, there's Public Square, and all the numbers emulate out from that spot. Blocks oftentimes are divided into 100s or 1000s. There's the 100 block, the 200 block. Oftentimes addresses even numbers on one side, odd numbers on the other side. And again, outdoors, what's the spacing between houses? Is it 2 numbers? Is it 4 numbers? So all of the things that become important if somebody's going to travel independently. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Orientation and mobility also consists of a number of cognitive components. First of all, let's talk about concept development in relation to body image. One of the most fundamental concepts is understanding one's own body. Some blind children are not aware of their own precise movements because they're not tuned into the concept of their body. They may not understand where the midline is, and they may not understand right and left. And if we ask them to bring their hand into the middle to hold a cane, they may not understand that. Or if we ask them to do something like a self-protective technique, bringing their arm up in front, they're not sure if their arm is all the way across their body. And it's because they don't have a concept of their bodies. Now, we also have concepts of the environment that are very important. Understanding the neighborhood, knowing that the neighborhood is made up of front yards, backyards, that there are blocks and that houses go around the block, that there are curbs that separate the sidewalk from the street, and even the concept of a car. I worked with one blind child that was protected quite a bit by his parents, overprotected, and really didn't explore very much. And the only time that child was ever in a car was when that child would be taking a trip. They go immediately into the car. And so when talking with the child about the car, the child really thinks about the car as almost like a sofa, because the child's only been in the back seat of the car, really hasn't explored it thoroughly. And even further in thinking about cars, do children know that cars keep to the right? How do cars make left turns? I've worked with kids who think that the outside environment, the traffic area, is like a giant parking lot where cars can go any way they want to go. So just the concepts of the environment become very, very important if somebody's going to be able to travel. Orientation. We've talked about this briefly already. Egocentric and allocentric. Egocentric, we said, was the relationship of the individual to objects in the environment from their own standpoint. It's to my right, it's to my left, etc. But there's another concept called allocentric. And that's when you have a bird's eye view of an area, so to speak, where you know the relationships. You know that the church is across the street from the grocery store, or that the library is catty corner to the church, or whatever it may be. And you know how the streets come together. And that's an allocentric approach, because you know the street patterns. It doesn't depend upon your relationship to it. And so that way you can plan more sophisticated routes of travel. Let's talk a little bit about problem solving. Problem solving is something that goes on all the time when somebody is traveling independently. They have to know when something goes wrong. And it requires divergent thinking and decision making. So for example, somebody's walking along the sidewalk and they have a cane out in front of them. And the cane moves from side to side and it touches the cement as they walk. And it tells them they're walking on the sidewalk. But all of a sudden that cane touches grass. And they walk a little further and their feet touch grass. What does that mean? They have to think about what could have gone wrong. And they have to think, well, maybe I walked up a driveway. Maybe I veered and I walked down a driveway. I'm hitting the grass. They have to think about, okay, where might I be on that driveway, and try to resolve the issue. Or if they're walking along in a business area and all of a sudden the sidewalk is tilting and soon there's nothing around them. It seems like it's open. Maybe they've wandered into a parking lot, or maybe they've even wandered into the street. So there always are questions, and it's really a question of having an inquisitive mind and solving problems. There are also psychosocial, or psychomotor, I should say, components. First of all, balance is very important. When people start walking in a neighborhood and they're using a cane, they have to be somewhat sure-footed. There are places where the sidewalk is down a little bit, where the sidewalk is up a little bit, where they're walking over tilted terrain, different types of terrain, and we really don't want to see people tripping. Also, we have to be aware of our bodies. We have to be aware of what we're doing. If we're making a turn, if we're making a 90-degree turn, it has to be an accurate 90-degree turn. If we're making a 180-degree turn, it has to be accurate. All of that becomes very important. Coordination is another area. If somebody is walking, they want to be able to place the cane tip correctly down on the ground where it should be, in relation to where their next step will be, because that tells them that it's safe to take that step. If they can't coordinate their cane movement with their feet, it becomes very difficult. Posture and gait is another area that we have to be concerned with. Young blind children, for example, oftentimes because they can't see the environment around them, they will make modifications to their gait and to their posture. They might have a broader base of support. Their feet may be a little farther apart, maybe even spread out a little bit, pointing outwards a little bit, to give them a broader, stable base. The way they walk may be different. Normally we have heel strike, touchdown, toe off. They may instead land more flat-footed because it is a safer way. You're not extending over your center of gravity. So all of these things we have to pay attention to so that we can help blind children as they develop. Straight line walking is another issue. In walking through a wide open area with wide sidewalks or passing parking lots, etc., gas stations, if somebody consistently veers and can't walk a straight line, they're always going to end up walking in or out of something. And lastly here, I want to talk about reaction time, which basically means stopping before the person oversteps something. So for example, the cane tip finds a small drop-off, which could be a curb. The individual needs to be able to react right away so that they don't overstep where that cane touched down and they don't step accidentally over the curb and into the street. Or if the cane touches grass, being able to stop before they walk onto that grass. So all of those are psychomotor components. There are also affective components. One of them has to do with adjustment to disability. Did the vision loss come on all at once, very suddenly? Or was it a gradual loss of vision? Was it a partial loss, or was it a complete loss? Was it an acuity loss where you can't see things clearly, or was it a narrowing of the field where you can see things clearly but only a pinpoint? All of those things will affect the adjustment of the individual. Also, there are stages of adjustment that individuals go through if they've lost their sight from a previous state. It may be shock, denial, all the way through acceptance. Those are things that O&M specialists need to know about and need to understand as they're working with their students. Attitude is something else. What's a component of an attitude? How are they formed? How do others react based upon their attitudes? How do I feel about myself? How does a blind child feel about himself or herself? What's the attitude of employers, and how does that affect whether or not somebody, once they gain the necessary skills, will be able to find a job? Motivation is another factor. Is an individual basically saying, I'm comfortable the way I am, I don't want to put myself out, I'd like to rather have other people take care of me? Or are they more independent? Are they willing to take some reasonable risks? Or are they pretty much sheltered and feeling, well, I really don't want to take a chance? Self-efficacy is another element. It's something that was developed by psychologist Bandura. And it was defined as one's ability and one's belief in one's ability to succeed in specific situations or to accomplish a task. So a person's sense of self-efficacy can play a major role in how they approach their goals, their tasks, and their challenges. If they believe they can do it, oftentimes they're going to work at it until they accomplish it. But if they don't have self-efficacy, they may give up very early. It's oftentimes related to self-confidence. It takes courage to go out and go to new places, especially when you've not been there before and you have to reorient or orient yourself anew to a place. You have to have confidence in your own skills and in your ability to solve travel problems that might come up. And there's another area that's called stigma. A person traveling with the cane is identifying to the world that they have a disability. To some individuals, that may be stigmatizing. How does this affect a very young child? How does it affect an adolescent who's so concerned about what others think about them? All right, let's talk about the populations that orientation and mobility specialists serve. Well, oftentimes we will serve infants and toddlers. But often when that's the case, we're working with parents. The role may be overwhelmingly working with parents, with some of our work directly with the child. We help the parents value their child. We help the parents see the possibilities in the future for their child. We connect those parents with other parents. And we work oftentimes directly with the child and with the parents on sensory stimulation. visual stimulation, concept development. So those are things that we do, and oftentimes as a consultant and as a direct provider. Preschool children, we're often working with preschool children. We're working with concepts of the environment. We're working with beginning mobility skills, sometimes with small canes, sometimes with adapted mobility devices. We work with school-aged children. And then we have to decide at what age would we expect them to be able to gain control over certain tasks. So in other words, we would ask ourselves, when do we expect them to walk alone in the neighborhood? When would we expect them to cross a residential street in a neighborhood? When would they cross a traffic light controlled street? At what age would they go to a business area? At what age would they go to a shopping mall? You know, we certainly want to cross-reference with kids that are sighted. We want the skills learned by children to be age appropriate. Adults, we work with adults. Adults want to take care of their families. They want to be able to go to work. We want to make sure that we can provide them with the skills that they need to do that. We work with a geriatric population, oftentimes who have given up driving because of loss of sight, and will be learning to take public transportation. They may have other disabilities, and they may not even be getting enough exercise, and we have to be cognizant of how much walking they can do or can't do. Deaf-blind individuals, without hearing and without sight, the ability to cross the street is difficult. How do they do that? How do they cross without hearing traffic? It may make all the difference between sitting at home versus leading an active life. Then we often work with individuals with multiple impairment. What effect does the combination of blindness with another disability have? For example, somebody who's had a brain injury and is visually impaired. How does that affect their ability to understand the environment, to travel, to remember, etc.? And then finally, do we have a role in non-visual impairment? There are instructors who work with individuals who are not blind, but are cognitively impaired, physically impaired, use wheelchairs. Can we work with those individuals? Oftentimes, we're better trained than anyone else to do that. So those are some of the very important areas. Another thing to consider is the age of onset. If somebody becomes blind before the age of 5, we generally say they're congenitally blind. That's because they have no visual memory or very little visual memory. Concept development becomes a major task for us. However, they're probably very strong in the use of their other senses. They've learned how to use hearing. They've learned how to use their sense of touch. Now, somebody who's adventitiously blind, on the other hand, after the age of 5, remembers visual images, has concepts of the environment because they've seen them before. But they may be much poorer in the use of their senses. They may not trust their hearing. And they may be more fearful. So knowing all of this makes a big difference in how we work with individuals. Let's talk about the areas that we're going to study in this class. We're going to talk about definitions, concepts, the history of the profession. We're going to talk about the remaining senses. We're going to talk about orientation. We'll talk about concept development. We'll talk about physical development. We'll delve into assessment and curricula. We'll talk about some of the psychosocial aspects, and we'll even get into some of the daily living skills that are important if kids are going to become independent. Let me say that typically students in this class are not going on to be O&M specialists, although some of you may be doing that. But unless you're going on to be an O&M specialist, you're really not going to be teaching directly some of the skills that you're going to be learning in the class. But what you will be doing is you'll be reinforcing them. You'll be making sure that the students use them after they're taught by the O&M specialist. You will work with a lot of the component areas, even if you're not an O&M specialist. The O&M specialist works with a child maybe 3 hours, 5 hours a week. But a teacher is there all day working with the child. And so all of the areas that we've talked about are areas that the teacher can have an impact upon. And so we're going to get an overview of each of those areas. And as a teacher will be aware, as a teacher, you'll be aware of some of the research in each of those areas. So you won't be teaching travel techniques per se, but you'll certainly be reinforcing them. And that will be more of the role. Those of you who go on to be O&M specialists will go into deeper content in all of these areas. You'll also be learning a number of techniques. These will be taught to you under the blindfold. You'll also have an opportunity to try them with visual simulation so that you'll get a sense of what it is like with reduced vision. You'll be learning human guide, where you walk holding onto a guide. You'll be doing that on stairs as well, and you'll have an opportunity to hold onto the railing as you do that. You'll be walking up and down the halls, locating objectives. One way to do that is to touch the wall or trail it. You'll also be using self-protective techniques to protect the upper part of your body, to protect the lower part of your body. You'll be learning how to find dropped objects, and you'll be learning in a new room, how do you orient somebody, and how would you orient yourself if you couldn't see. At the very end, you'll also be learning application of eating skills. So, I would like to, at this point, just give you a quick overview of Human Guide in a video that I have found on the web.
Good afternoon, my name is Tyler Idowin, and we will be teaching you Human Guide technique. When my right arm touches your left arm, you will reach up my arm to the elbow area and hold it like you would a pop can. You want to make sure your elbow is bent at a 90-degree angle. If the student you are working with is shorter, they may also grab your wrist or your pointer and middle finger. You want to make sure their elbow is at a 90-degree angle. Once they're holding you in the proper location, you want to have them step one step behind and in from yourself. So in this instance,
these are skills that you will be learning as well in a very similar way.
All right, Jessica, we are at a wall, so we need to do an about turn. So let go of my right arm and do one 90-degree turn to your left and face me. Do one more 90-degree turn, and I will touch your arm and initiate Human Guide again. And we're off. Jessica, we are coming up to a narrow passageway. I will place my arm behind my back, and you will slide your hand down my arm and grab my wrist, and you will slide in one step behind me. We will walk through. And once on the other side, I will put my arm back at my side and we'll resume Human Guide technique and walk away. Jessica, we are now going to have to switch the sides that I am Human Guiding you with. You will take your left arm and slide it across my back until you find my other arm. Once you have found it, you will grab my left arm with the opposite hand of what you were
We'll be learning a little different technique than that, but this gives you some idea of how it's done.
We are off. Jessica, we are coming up on a chair. It is on your right, so please reach to your right and find the chair. Let go of my arm and face the chair. Pull it out and have a seat. We are now approaching
This is often a challenge, opening and closing a door, assisting someone.
Please help me to open it and assume narrow passageway. And once we are through, we will resume Human Guide position. We are now approaching a pull open door on your free-hand side. I will pull it open and you will help me to pull it open the rest of the way. Assume narrow passage position. Walk through and resume Human Guide on the other side. Push open door on your grip hand side. You will transfer sides. It is now push open door on your free hand side. And we will walk through and resume Human Guide technique. Now approaching a pull open door on your grip hand side. You will transfer sides. pull open door on your free hand side. Pull it open and assist. Narrow passageway and walk through. Jessica, we are coming up on some stairs. I want you to walk up and touch the front of your toes to the front of the stairs. Reach to your right and grab the handrail and follow my lead to the top. Once we are at the top, you will know because I will pause to indicate the stairs are finished.
You're going to be having all of these experiences.
On some stairs that go down, I want you to find the beginning of the stairs with the tips of your feet. I want you to reach to your right and grab the handrail, and we will walk down. And you will know the stairs are finished when I pause at the end.
We'll stop at this point.
I'm going to do the upper body protective technique.
And if you have questions, please bring them forward in our discussion board. And that is the end of this particular video.